Where did we come from? Were we made? Then we just spring up randomly. I've been speculating, hypothesizing, thinking about this sort of question. Where did we come from? And I've come to the realization that maybe perhaps we were made, but if we were made by a God, why does our physical bodies have cancer and diseases? Why do people get born with disabilities if we were made by God? Doesn't that suggest that perhaps we weren't made and that we were just products of evolution and Darwinism, hence why our biologies sometimes fail and why some people are born with defects and all sorts of problems? And why does cancer exist if we were created by God? Why were we made in such a horrible way? Why do people get born without eyes? If we were created by God, what the hell? I just can't fathom. Of course, evolution, Darwinism makes much more sense. That's what I believe, because I believe that if we were made by God, why would he make us without evening? And the topic of this video is going to be about the fact that did we evolve or were we created? Back at it. Reality is a paradox, and in this episode of Reality is a Paradox, we're going to dive into this very deep question of the origins of humanity. Where did we come from? How were we made? Were we put here, or were we just what happened to us? What is our history? And to kick everything off, again, I'm going to clearly state the topic of this video again. Did we evolve or were we created? Now there's, regarding humanity and our development and our history, there's two schools of thought. There's sort of the Darwinian view, the theory of evolution sort of thing related to Charles Darwin, this sort of school of thought that us human beings, along with other living creatures on this planet, we were gradually developing from lesser things and evolving and changing our ways, our physical forms and everything to do with that. And we, after billions of years of mutations and natural selection and adaptation, we came out of the ocean. We were fish-like creatures. Then we became something more like a mammal. Then that turned into something more like a monkey. And then that turned into more of a caveman. And then to modern man, it's this sort of evolutionary development. And that is there's two schools of thought. So Darwinism, the theory of evolution, natural selection, as I've just described it, entailing what would it be? Natural selection is pretty much that, and mutations and adaptations and the genome changing and shifting and the creatures and animals becoming different and adjusting carefully to their environments after strenuous amounts of again, natural selection and thousands of years of mutations and adaptations. I don't want to keep going over the same points. And that is one school of thought, which is us human beings, along with every other living thing, we evolved from lesser things. We came out of the ocean floor and we started to evolve and adapt and develop onto land. And our physical features were carefully shifting and changing so we can better survive in the various environments that are here on Earth. Henceforth, that's where all living things come from, and us human beings, all living things along with us human beings, we all originate from some sort of prehistoric living organism that was in the ocean that kind of just mutated gradually and turned into different things over time through natural selection and adaptation. And I'm kind of butchering it, but in a nutshell, that's what kind of the theory of evolution, natural selection, Darwinism kind of entails. And that's this one school of thought that's very, very much predominant now. But on the other hand, if, regarding evolution, if we evolved, where did life originate from? Did life just come out of the ocean floor for no fucking reason? When we were in the ocean, why did life just randomly come alive? Where did the source, why were the genetic code so sophisticated? Where did all of life originate from? Why is it that life just came out of the ocean for no fucking reason? Life is just spontaneous. It just originated from fucking nowhere. And the origin of our species and evolution and life, the genetic code just came alive for no reason. And that's where we all come from, just from random sea soup coming alive and becoming more advanced and mutating and adapting. And from lifeless sea soup, we became into real life human beings, and we were changing and becoming monkeys. Then we turned to cavemen, then we turned into modern men, and evolution and gajillions of mutations over a course of billions of years. And here we are today. Does that make much sense? I believe there's that must be credible. Most people today, that certainly people from Europe and America, but it's also from parts of Asia now, most people are kind of coming more and more accustomed to Darwinism and the theory of evolution. And I'm someone that's kind of I'm not going to give you my opinions on this right now, but I just want to kind of clarify this. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought, which was more predominant in the Middle Ages and a little bit further back into our history, this is more of the old school of thought, which was the fact that us human beings perhaps the other animals as well, were not like evolving and adapt, none of that stuff. We were just made by God, put here on earth. And then the biblical narrative, the Quranic narrative, like Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden. They arrived here on earth. They had like lots of children and descendants, and that's where we come from as human beings. Other animals were made by God. Enough said. It's like such a simple view. It's so much more simpler, this sort of like school of thought, like creationism. And that's just like the Abrahamic spin on it. There's also, because creationism doesn't have to just involve like the Abrahamic faith, like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, even though that's like typically what it's associated with. There's also some other sorts of like religions that have their own like stories, creation stories, like Hinduism, other religions like that. But I just want to focus on the Abrahamic faiths just to make this video much more simpler. And again, so I just carefully outlined like the two schools of thought that predominate academia, like the Darwinian school of thought and like the creationism like school of thought narrative, that we were just put here and made by God along with every other living thing. Every living thing and creature was evolving, adapting via natural selection, adaptations coming out of the ocean floor and carefully adjusting to land and tweaking its genetics and biology bit by bit until here we are today. Both have like some sort of like, both have their own merits. The one downside to the Darwinian school of thought, at least in my opinion regarding like academic literature, is the fact that how did the first living, were we made by God? Did God just put us here and God just made us? But if we were made by God, why do people get born with disabilities? Why do people get cancer? Why do people get born with no legs? If we were made by God, why do people that are disabled exist? Were they made disabled on purpose? Why are there like disabilities? Why are there amputees? Why are there people with handicaps and genetic disorders? Wouldn't a creator make us in a perfect way? We were made in the image of God, but why were we made? Why do some of us have such flawed bodies and immune systems? Why is it that a lot of us are just like crippled so many times and disabled? And I just can't even fathom, if we were made by God, why did God make us in such a flawed way sometimes, resulting in like disabilities? And there's just so many mysteries, and I just can't even fathom. Were we made, or did we evolve from monkeys? And this tale of like evolution and being created, it's all so mysterious, and I can't even fathom. I'm just as lost as you are. Organism, how did it come alive? Where did life actually originate from? Even if you believe blah blah blah, we all came out of the ocean, everything was like mutations and natural stuff, blah blah blah. If we jump all the way back to the beginning stage in the ocean, abiogenesis, which is kind of like the foundation of this, that life, where did life come from? Was it just always here, or did it like something kick it off? Why, even if you believe in the theory of evolution, Darwinism, that doesn't even fully explain where we come from, because where did life come from? Did it just come from nothing? Did all of life originate from just like random things coming alive in the ocean, like random like dead inorganic material just magically comes alive, and that is like the origin for all of like living things in existence today? Is that like sensible? That's like one of my always biggest critiques with like the theory of evolution and Darwinism, this sort of like school of thought that predominates academia now. It's like, okay, fair enough, we might have been evolving, we might have been mutating, adapting, fair enough, that's fair enough. I'm not here to argue against anyone's convictions on this. I'm not here to argue against any of these like two schools of thought. I'm not here to like give my own opinions, but I just want to like kind of offer some levels of like critiques. Actually, what am I saying? I'm saying I don't want to give my opinions, but I'm giving my opinions now. But you know, one of the issues with like the theory of evolution, Darwinism, this school of thought, is that, bro, if we, all right, fair enough, we evolved, blah blah blah. I already went over the whole thing. But at the beginning stage in the ocean, where did life actually come from? That's actually what, like, even I think Richard Dawkins fumbled on this sort of question, that yeah, we evolved in natural selection, mutations, adaptations. All right, that's warranted, that's fair enough, but where did life actually originate?
Where matter produces information added into the genes. By the way, if evolution is true, it had to happen zillions of times. We just want one example, just one. I want you to see how he answers the question.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
There he is giving the right answer right now. Can you hear it? That is the right answer. There's no example.
From why did life spring up in the first place? Where did life come from? Why did the first living creature, organism that we all descend from in the ocean, where did it come from? Why did its genetics have like such a sophisticated structure? Where is like the origin of like all of like life coming from? And these sorts of questions, bro, they'll make your head explode. But if we evolved then why do we not develop cancer or mutations? So the theory of evolution posits that the ancestors of mammals, mankind, every living thing originated from lifeless sea soup that was mutating and changing. But if an animal species starts to mutate and change, wouldn't it develop cancer cells in its body? Wouldn't it have all sorts of disabilities inevitably arising? Wouldn't mutated lifeless sea creatures coming out of the ocean floor eventually die because their biologies can't change fast enough? Otherwise the cancer would come in. And there's so many flaws regarding like the origin of us coming out of the ocean floor and the theory of evolution. If we evolved, wouldn't that mean that our ancestors were mutating? But if they were mutating, wouldn't they have developed cancer and tumors in their bodies, which would have compromised their ability to stay alive? And wouldn't that have eventually led to the demise of their species? And I'm so lost for words, I just can't even fathom. It just doesn't make any... If you're a Darwinist, most people that believe in this sort of like theory of evolution, they'll like tell you all sorts of like things about all mutations, Homo sapiens developing, blah 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 blah. We all came from like the ocean floor and trilobites, bro. But why did the first living thing in the ocean come alive? Why were its genetics written in the way they were that allowed it to like spring forth? Like why would life just spring forth randomly out of the ocean for no reason? If there was no creator, who wrote the genetic code? Did the genetic code exist already? Why did that genetic code start to become more advanced? These sorts of questions. That's why Darwinism, this school of thought, is kind of, I don't really think it's very powerful. I don't think it has much explanatory power, because it ultimately, where did life come from? Or God doesn't exist if you're an atheist. Or Darwinism, evolution, but okay, but so where did life spring up from? Or it just came out of the ocean floor for no reason. Life magically came alive from dead inorganic material. The genetic code started to become more sophisticated for no fucking reason, and then that led to us being here today. Okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. And creationism is this other sort of school of thought that we were just made by God. Everything that you see around you was just made by God. And I believe that's, even some people might see that that's still absurd. Both of these like schools of thought are absurd. There's like, I believe that I kind of have like a middle ground approach. I think that, you know, Darwinism, evolution, adaptation, I think that's very, very, there's some evidence for it. Like, you know, dogs descend from the grey wolf, but modern dog breeds have been like, their bodies are completely like alien looking compared to like the ancestor that they descend from, which was a grey wolf. That's like one sort of like demonstrable proof for like natural selection, adaptation, and animals kind of changing form and shape over time. That's like a proof. But still, like, where did like, then there's like, still, if you only believe in like Darwinism, evolution, blah, 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 where did all of life come from? Why was the first living organism alive? Why was its genetics made in such a way that it was able to like replicate and become more advanced? Where did that come from? And that's where I believe that I kind of have like, I think most people, most theologians as well, most Christians, Muslims, Jews now as well, they take like a middle ground approach. Were we created, or were we evolved, or did we evolve? I think the middle ground approach is so adequate here, because even if you're like, it goes both, like, even if you're a Muslim, Christian, and Jew, one of the things I never understood is, if we all come from Adam and Eve, why are there black people, white people, Chinese people, Indian people? Why are there so many different groups of people with different physical? And if we were created by God, why would God create us sometimes disabled? Why would God make us with like cancer? Why would God allow diseases to exist and people to be born with like autism and stuff? There's so many unanswered questions, and there's such a mystery. Where did we come from? Were we created, or were we evolving from lesser things? And this sort of like riddle of like creation and evolution, being descending from like monkeys, or being put here by the hands of God, and it's such a conundrum, and I'm just so bewildered. I just don't really understand it all, and it's like so weird and whimsical, and I'm trying to explain it all, but it doesn't make much sense. Were we put here by the hands of God, or did we descend from monkeys? And if you believe the latter, why? If you believe the other reason, why? And where did we come from? And is it true that we are merely just like sophisticated primates walking around just like chimpanzees with less hair? And I can't even fathom appearances and characteristics if we all come from Adam and Eve. I believe that in and of itself would entail like adaptation, evolution in some ways, that the descendants of Adam were changing their physical shapes and forms to better suit their environments, and that's like evolution, bro. Even like regarding like Islam, Christianity, Judaism, even the Abrahamic faiths, they kind of hint at like evolution as well, Darwinism, which doesn't have to go hand in hand with like atheism as well, because bro, most people kind of mix these things up. There's like the school of thought of Darwinism, bro, it doesn't entail atheism, like it's a separate thing on its own. But I think it's like, I like a middle ground approach. I think that something had to make everything in the beginning, and then like evolution is sort of like just like a natural process that might have been put here by some sort of creative force. It's like a means to an end to make life more sophisticated and complex and to bring us here. I believe in like a middle ground approach where we created or where we made. I think in the middle here, guys, we were made originally and then we start to mutate and evolve. That's at least my 2 pennies on this. I said I don't want to give my opinions, but I'm giving you my opinions now. So we were placed here by the hands of God. Why would God make us with like disabilities? And people sometimes get born without legs and eyes and limbs. People sometimes get born with cancer cells in their bodies. There's so much unanswered, mysterious questions. And I'm so lost for words. Were we put here by the hands of God, or do we descend from monkeys and lifeless sea soup? I just don't know. And there's just quest for answers is never ending, and I guess we'll never know. I guess we'll always stay in the dark, and I'm just so lost for words and like so curious about this all. And if we were we made by the hands of God? Why do we sometimes get born without legs and disabilities? But if we were evolving and descending from lifeless sea soup and monkeys, why don't we look like monkeys? How can an organism change into a completely different environment and stay alive and not die? And I'm just so lost for words. And if we evolved, why are there still monkeys? And if we were made by God, why do some people get born without legs if they were made in the perfect image of God? So many unanswered questions.